You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, interviews from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s with voices from the past.
It wasn't only the music, was it? It was something beyond that.
There was something magical about them.
That's right. There was something beyond all precedent and experience, and it really hasn't been succeeded.
Beatles press agent Derek Taylor. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. Derek Taylor was a working journalist when he first met the Beatles, as he was literally in the right place at the right time, as the Beatles were just on the cusp of achieving major fame in England. Manager Brian Epstein brought Derek Taylor on as the Beatles press agent. Taylor then accompanied the boys as they rocketed to worldwide fame. Taylor's story, as he told in his 1987 book called It Was 20 Years Ago Today, illustrates how the Beatles transcended mere music. They were good musicians, but they went way beyond music to become cultural icons whose influence continues to this day. So here now, from 1987, Derek Taylor.
For the uninitiated, those perhaps who are too young to know or who have forgotten, who is Derek Taylor?
Derek Taylor has to accept, and does so ungrudgingly, that forever he will be the former Beatles press agent. However, he has had other lives and lives in the now, as recommended by his friend George Harrison, who's quoted in this book as believing that we mustn't haunt the past and we shouldn't look to the future but should live in the now. Now, Derek Taylor was a journalist who got lucky in the 60s and met the Beatles and was picked by them to be a press officer. As the Beatles finished in 1970, so Derek Taylor moved on to be director of special projects at Warner Brothers Records, and on through that corporate structure to be vice president in Burbank, and decided it wasn't really a lot of fun listening to new albums. So, moving out of the third person to the now, I now live and leap from book to book and trust that, as Roger McGuinn of the Bird said, everything will work out all right.
Was it just luck that you wound up as a press agent? Well,
I think so, yes. I mean, there were, in those days, a lot of people around, but I happened to be, if you liked, the right shape and size and age, perhaps, rather older than them, but not old-fashioned, at a time when they were well known in England and could be said to be famous, but they hadn't been to America. And Brian Epstein, their manager, wanted someone to ghost his autobiography. The Daily Express, for whom I worked, wanted a Beatle to write a column, and so I sort of ghosted that. But at the same time, I was also a theatre critic on many other matters, and had been a general reporter, so I was pretty comprehensive as a working journalist, and therefore had a handle on things that perhaps that they didn't know a lot about. So I was useful, and as I say, from Liverpool, and at a time when they needed a new press officer, I slotted into that and became Epstein's personal assistant in time for the big plunge into the world when we went to Australia, New Zealand, and then America in '64. I'm sorry, it's a long answer to a short question. Okay.
Has it surprised you over all these years at how legendary the Beatles have become, that they have become the standard against which all others are measured?
No, that hasn't surprised me. What does surprise me is to hear you say it. We haven't met before, and I know it, but you reinforce it. And every time I hear someone originate it, I'm surprised, and yet I'm not surprised. I expected them to be that which they are. But sometimes you think it's all in your own head, because I've got to know them very well and always believed it anyway. I was, a serious enthusiast. It wasn't only the music, was it? It was something beyond that, and that's what we're talking about. I think all the time we're talking beyond the music.
Exactly. They were four very talented musicians, of course, but
yes,
each one individually, there are singers today who can sing as well. A few composers, perhaps, who on the right day can compose as well, but there was something magical about them.
That's right. There was something beyond all precedent and experience, and there really hasn't been succeeded. I don't think that there was always going to be another Beatles. There was always a Dave Clark 5, in waiting, but it never really amounted to anything in the long run. And even the wonderful American response, I just mentioned the Byrds. The Byrds were certainly regarded by the Beatles as terribly important. There were the San Francisco people, there were all those folk singers who combined to be mamas and papas, Grassroots, Leaves, Turtles, and then there was the Paul Simon and Garfunkel, the San Francisco groups, many of them still performing. There had been the Beach Boys, who were world famous, deservedly, who could knock out dozens and dozens of tunes. They can sustain a career forever, making people think that it's always summer. But, having said that, none of those people are the Beatles. So there never was another, and of course there never will be. You put Bob Dylan in there with Elvis, and you've just about got the golden triangle. As with the other kind of music, you had Jolson, Crosby, and Sinatra. Then you can have Tony Bennett and Vic Damone endorsed by Sinatra till he's blue in the face. But there's only,
Often imitated but never duplicated.
There's only Frank left. And he's not going to be succeeded. So why? I don't know.
Well, as the book, as the name of your book implies, 20 years ago today is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. 20 years. It's hard to believe it's been.
It is. It still sounds fresh. Yes. It's. On the other hand, if you see the fashions of yesterday in the book, as you know, and this is shameless plugging, but I have to do it somehow to get away from the Beatles. We can return if you wish. It's about more than that. It's about a countercultural explosion in America, against which Sgt. Pepper has to be set, really. And it was in that context that Sgt. Pepper got that halo around it, because it wasn't necessarily their greatest album, but it's the only one we could, I think, build a little radio show around, again, because of what it seemed to be. It seemed to have a colour and a texture which was...
It was
sparkling, right on time.
It was right for that era. If it had been released in 1964 or in 1972, it wouldn't have been the same, would it?
And it wouldn't have been the same in '68, which was a darker time in American culture, wasn't it? And it was a time of assassinations and Chicago problems at the convention and student riots. So in that environment, the rather more serious White Album came out with songs that weren't again, I was going to say weren't as light-hearted. There were serious songs on Sgt. Pepper. She's Leaving Home is quite a serious song about a child who's not happy. A Day in the Life is about someone who blew his mind out in a car. But upbeat is the feeling you get when the album's through. I mean, one of the people I quote in the book says, you could wake up feeling nervous in the morning and play Sgt. Pepper and feel brave all day. And it does have the effect of encouraging people. I mean, Abby Hoffman said, and others, that, they not only did they remember when they first heard it, but it was a good album to plan revolution by. So it had everything for everybody, didn't it?
How often do you personally get a chance to put an album on, a Beatles album, and listen? Is it daily, weekly?
Well, how often do I take the whim to do it? I think if my wife and I feel like getting into a mode to find out how it felt, since we've been around since the beginning of time, as a couple, then we'll put it on, say, once every 2 or 3 months, and we'll do an Abbey Road and the Songs for Swinging Lovers, and perhaps a James Taylor. All these are people who spoke of their time, and that's really what great popular music should be. It should be of its time and survive. And if it doesn't, then of course it was disposable. That's not to say it's bad, but some music is quite disposable. I think a lot of today's music, I fear there isn't the depth, though that could be my age.
About 5 or 6 years ago, my wife was in a record store behind a girl who was probably 13 or 14 and heard her say to another 13 or 14-year-old, "Did you know that Paul McCartney used to be with another group before Wings?"
Well, that's very healthy, I think. Don't you? I think that's good. Perhaps it's a lack of a sense of history, but I think a one-note Beatle fan can be leading a fairly limited life. I think it's as well to know about what's going on around our own times. So it's difficult for someone of, say, a certain age to realise that McCartney isn't remembered as one of the Beatles. Although a lot of people don't see him as one of the Beatles.
Makes you feel older, doesn't it?
I am old, dear.
Golly, I remember when the first Beatles record came into my household, how scandalized my father was at the length of their hair.
Yeah, well, Frank Sinatra's press agent said they've got hair long enough to grow 2 watermelons in it. But of course, now you look at it, it was like Gene Pitney. Little dark suits and white collars and black ties, bowing at the end of the Ed Sullivan Show. So you see, now you look at those terrorists on MTV and see how polite the Beatles were. Yes, well, I mean, it's all a matter of scale and perspective, isn't it?
Are there drug messages in their records?
I don't think there are any drug messages. If there are references, they're pretty overt. I'd Love to Turn You On is ambiguous, but there's no doubt that one aspect of it was I'd love to turn you on to, seeing beyond yourself, take you through the doors of perception, get you high, whatever. And there's also I'd love to turn you on to a new way of looking at things. There is certainly no drug messages in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. It's not LSD, as they said. Otherwise, John would have copped to it. He was never a dissembler. It was about his Julian's little friend Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in the painting. It's the boy brought back from school. A little help from my friends. Again, perhaps there's ambiguity, but what the song is about is the outsider saying, I'm a bit of an outsider, I think. Are you still my friends? They're all saying, yes, Ringo, of course we are. We'll look after you. What is it you want? He says, I need somebody to love. So I think there were no hidden drug messages, though it's public record, isn't it, that they were smoking pot and taking LSD in those days. Those were the drugs of choice then. We claimed, maybe we were deceiving ourselves, that we were looking for a higher consciousness. But sometimes perhaps we just wanted to get high.
I'm curious about something. What goes through a press agent's mind when his client sits in front of the television cameras and reporters from all over the world and says, I think we're more popular than Jesus Christ?
Well, fortunately then, which was a very difficult time, I wasn't working for them. I dropped out and came back in 1967. I mean, that would be a big panic for me then. Brian Epstein did ring from Port Mary and said, John has been quoted saying the most awful thing, and we've got to do the American tour. I'm not asking advice, I'm just ringing you to communicate. And I said, well, I'm very glad I don't have to deal with it, because it was clearly said, and it wasn't even taken out of context. It was just John being John, wasn't it? And as he said, I'm sorry, and he came and he did that, I think, fairly abject and undeniably difficult apology at the airport, saying, yeah, I did say it, and now I'll probably be nailed up for, sort of trying to talk my way out of it. But on the face of it, well, it was true. I mean, certainly in England, which has got a 5% church-going population in the Church of England, all the rest are fairly pagan. It was true. They were more popular than Jesus in a straw poll in the street. In America, it was much more difficult because you have more church-going, you have a Bible Belt, and it was headlined. I mean, it was in a newspaper in England in the middle of a whole load of other stuff. I was very relieved not to be dealing with it. I, even now, don't know how to explain my way out of it. But there again, they were known for giving very direct answers. I mean, one of the most direct answers they used to give, which I'd never heard before from public figures, was, I don't know, if they didn't know anything. Most people sort of give an opinion, but a given or, conventional wisdom. But if they didn't know, they used to say, I don't know.
If they were just now, in 1987, emerging as this brand new group, and you were their press agent, and they were emerging to the same kind of success that they had when you were starting with them, would you handle them differently today than you did
No, it was always the easy thing about handling them was that if you ever could get them to people, and I mean there was too much pressure really to do anything but scratch the surface, to do more than scratch the surface of things. It was always a matter of pride that they would never let you down. They would always be interesting. They would always be open, fun, and people were so jolly pleased, particularly away from England. It was more noticeable in America and Australia. That an interview with the Beatles was always rewarding. Not only did you have the famous voices, which were then very commercial, but you had a bit of sparkle and a bit of an edge to what you were getting from them, particularly if you got more than one. So, it was really like having a nice family, and people said, what nice children you've got. I mean, aren't the Beatles great? It was really nice being with such pleasant people. It was a privilege.
Derek Taylor died in 1997. He was 65. Now, you can get a copy of Derek Taylor's book, It Was 20 Years Ago Today, by clicking on the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you'll also hear my 2007 interview with another pop figure from the 60s, Donovan.
I come from a storytelling tradition. In fact, it's clear to me now that I'm a reincarnated bard of a Celtic order who can teach through music.
And my 2002 conversation with Graham Nash.
His greatest dream was to attend the soccer cup final at Wembley Stadium. He never made it. So when Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young played Wembley Stadium at a concert, the first thing I did was go down onto the field and start kicking a ball around for my dad.
And as you know, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us on all major podcast platforms, including now YouTube. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, she made history in the 1980s by becoming the first woman to be elected Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. My 1993 interview with Wilma Mankiller.
I think even my name conjures up visions of someone who probably rides to work on a horse. There are a lot of stereotypes about Native people.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.